Oh, I thought that was somebody encouraging me. Damn. Anyways, but all good people. The session is now being recorded. It's recorded for two purposes. One, to give access to people who couldn't make it today for a variety of reasons. And two, if the session goes exceedingly well, we'll upload it to our YouTube channel, which is psychologyatwork.blog, where I highly recommend next time you have trouble sleeping, you'll visit it because it should help you with getting you to sleep. We have included their stuff if you're interested in personality. We have a 5-week lecture course, well, it's 5 sessions, all about personality psychology, starting with history to application. And we also have an interview with the late Peter Saville, who recently passed away, sadly. So he was a creator of OPQ, Saville, and 10X. So if you ever kind of want to go down the history pages, check out the YouTube channel, and maybe this video will be there up as well. But enough about YouTube. So how will the session be structured? So first, we'll do a bit of introductions. Then we're going to cover the topic of personality. And then we're going to cover the topic about coaching. Because today we're covering two constructs. One is personality, one is coaching. And then we'll discuss how they go together. And most importantly, we'll discuss the risks that it poses, such as boxing people in, such as, of course you'll do that, you're an extrovert, or people who might then use those boxes to justify behavior. I'm not being mean, they're just over dramatic, I'm just a red. So there's different ways that psychometrics can backfire. And then we'll talk about the opportunities, because as Dawn mentioned, as Simon mentioned previously, psychometrics can be beneficial. It is, but at the end of the day, all psychometrics are just tools. So it matters how you use them. And we'll spend probably a good hour just discussing practice. So how to pick a psychometric to use. Because I've been qualifying people for 10 years in psychometrics. And quite often people come to me and say, I just qualified as a coach and I need a psychometric. Any will do. And I go, just please don't qualify in any psychometrics right now. Find the tool that's right for you. You might do yourself more harm than good. Also, here's a little secret from the industry. A large proportion of people who pay sometimes £1,000 for a qualification in psychometrics never use them, ever, because it wasn't right for them. So, and there's much cheaper ways to learn about personality than go into a qualification. So therefore, we're going to go through steps you can take as an individual when considering doing a personality assessment qualification, what sort of due diligence you can do to increase the chances you will actually use it in the future. But does that sound like a plan for today? I have 3 nods from the 3 people with the video. And as a psychologist, I will say it's a representative sample of 50 people. So we will move on. So a little bit about me, some narcissism. So roughly speaking, I've probably done more than 5,000 one-to-one sessions using different psychometrics, probably about 100 team builds. What else? I'm qualified in about a dozen tools. Yeah, worked for 3 publishers. Then, and the number 2 is the amount of psychometrics I used to profile my wife-to-be before I proposed. I used 2 personality assessments because using just one for such high consequence selection decisions is purely irresponsible, if you ask me. And this number 1 should be updated because it says I have 1 child. Now I have 2. This slide has not been updated clearly in the last 12 months. So I'm a bit obsessed with personality. I think, to me, that's the key thing. We don't know what personality is. We try to define it. But to me, whenever you talk about personality assessments, and whether it be Hogan, EQ, MBTI, NEO, Spark, you name it, we're all measuring the same elephant. So it's like that old proverb of blindfolded people touching the same elephant, but because they think it's different textures, they think it's different creatures, but it's the same one. And whether we come with any perspectives on personality, we're all assessing personality just from different angle, whether it's type or trait or what have you. And the key thing is, the quicker people realize it, the more fun it becomes. Because otherwise, I have spilled so many beers, especially for some weird reason in Brighton, arguing about type versus trait. before realizing it's type and trait, and we can learn a hell of a lot from each other. And that's what makes me really excited. And what personality is, in my opinion, it's a phenomenon of individual differences. And we don't know where it comes from. It could be genetics. It is genetics. We know that to an extent. Brain structure, how we brought up, cultural norms, life events, and the list goes on and on and on that adds to this phenomenon. And that's why I think it's so fascinating to study it. Then what I mainly do is teams. So team development, one-to-one coaching. I also pair up with a therapist and we do couples coaching. So she brings a couple and I bring the spark, the psychometric, and we pair up. And by the way, Don, the spark is the name of a psychometric. It's not like bring a spark to their marriage. I would not say that. That would be a bit overstepping, but I think it works as a nice little double entendre. And by the way, Don, what they say about marriage?
I've been married 44 years, so I think I do.
Nice.
I've got a bit of experience.
Well, first of all, you deserve a medal. And second, what they say about marriage is it's psychological. One tends to be the psycho, the other one's logical. And what really kind of excites me is facilitating collective intelligence. It's a phrase that a psychometric publisher called Ron Warren uses. And to me, that's what's really key. We all like different things. We all see the world differently. And I think by being a little bit more aware about personality, we can work better with people who are very different to us. And it actually makes each other's lives easier. And so this is one of the reasons I love using psychometrics. And my basic mission is to share goodness of psychology through such events as this, because I think there's just so much goodness in it. I mean, there's also really scary kind of stuff in the history, how psychometrics were used. And we probably will touch upon it in the next 2 hours. But that's enough of narcissism about me. Now I want to hear a bit about you. So if you can go to menti.com. So if you can type in menti.com and type in that code. Oh, hello, Louis. Just noticed your message in the chat. And if you can go to this link or type in 6438-6209, that'd be awesome. Oh, and press the little heart so I know you're there. Oh, 9 people. Oh, hey, Nikki, I can see you next to your fancy fireplace. Oh, and Josh, you're coming back with a cup of tea or coffee. Lovely. Oh, excellent. So we have some people in. So I want to ask you, how long have you been coaching? So if you're a coach, if you can put down, like, have you been coaching for 5 years, 10 years? 0 to 5 years, good choice. 10 to 20. Oh, we'll get more yet to start. Oh, man, we're not going to get a standard distribution here. I should have definitely cut out the other 2. Then it'll be fine. But yeah, so we have 2100. Okay, so roughly speaking, even if 15 of you said that, let's say, 5 to 10 years, it's picking up. So roughly speaking, we'll probably have about 100 years worth of coaching in this room right now. Well, not room, it's a digital space, but who makes the difference right now? But we have like more years than any of us can gain in our lifetime. And therefore, it's really would be exciting to kind of build on this experience and thoughts. And so we'll also soon we'll have our first breakout room, just as a little caveat. And hopefully people who are yet to start, well, you get to cover quite a lot of ground, and would also love your participation as well, because you have a fresh perspective. So now when it comes to psychometrics, so do you use psychometrics in your coaching? Oh, great. I'm not the only one. Sometimes, yeah. Hey, maybe we'll get a standard distribution on this one. Here's to hoping. Nope. Yep. So excellent, quite a few. And now we come to the question, which tools do you use? So what sort of psychometrics? Is it a little bit of Hogan, a little bit on the dark side? Or are you more kind of bright side and EQI? OPQ, oh, God bless it. Do you know a little fun fact? OPQ was supposed to be called BOPQ. It was supposed to be the British Occupational Personality Questionnaire. But I'm really happy that Peter got talked out of it, because I think OPQ has a much better ring to it. Lumina Spark, where hey, insights, Big Five, Strength Scope, Hogan, Neo, lovely. Oh, it's a nice little spread. But the key thing is there's literally hundreds of different personality assessments out there, literally hundreds. So one of the key things is to find the right one for you. And now what we're gonna do, I'm gonna put you into breakout rooms for about, let's say, I'll say 5 to 10 minutes. And the aim is to first meet other people on the call, but also to discuss of what would you like to explore in the next 1.5 hours or so about personality and coaching. So we can really zoom in this session to be of value to you good people. Oh, perfect. Oh, is that David? I can see. Perfect. So breakout rooms are open. You have 5 to 10 minutes to have a chat. Just get to meet each other, have a little chat, connect, and also discuss like what would be particularly useful for you today. So I shall see you in 5 to 10 minutes. And now you should be getting an invitation. Oh, right. I need to pause.
Questions that we're hoping you'll be able to answer us, Nikita.
Oh, what questions?
Well, Pinky would like to know about in what circumstances you use different questionnaires. Georgina's very interested in psychometrics and becoming a psychometrician, for example. And then there was a whole issue of, the suite of instruments that we can have. And, you can use a suite of instruments all joined together to get a real in-depth view of somebody. For example, I've used values, a values questionnaire, personality and career interest inventory with someone, so they get a real rounded view from different perspectives.
Oh, excellent, because it's nice to have a nice toolkit to go. And as far as psychometrics, I'll give you the same answer as an avid bike friend of mine said, what's the perfect number of bikes? Because it's a simple answer, one more. So with psychometrics, it's always more. I love getting qualified in tools because they all give different perspectives. And then you have a bigger toolkit to choose from what to use.
Yes.
Because otherwise if you're confined to one tool, and it's okay to have a favorite, like I usually have a favorite. At one point, I used Neo-PIR so much, I started to almost become synesthetic because the portrait started to have a taste. So I said, it's time to move on from a psychometric. If it starts to develop synesthesia response to it, that's when, it's time to broaden your horizons.
Yes.
Absolutely. And Georgina, you want to get qualified in psychometrics? Any particular reason?
Yeah, so it kind of brings together my background and skills across different assets of psychology and also data analysis. And I'm just kind of looking for something that brings it all together, and it just seems like a very good fit. And it was an area I was really interested when I studied psychology and neuroscience, was kind of psychometric testing and looking at how that can influence the way you think about jobs or way we interact or how to better yourself. So yeah,
absolutely, because it can be nice kind of combination. And for anybody interested in getting qualified, at psychologyatwork.blog we'll be running a pilot program, probably beginning of spring. It's going to be a 5-lecture course. The program itself is going to be free. The course is going to be all about the practical application of psychometrics, and we partnered with several different publishers, including like Podium, Lumina, LMAP. And if you're on this program, you'll get a menu of courses you can attend, qualifications at a highly reduced price. So if you want to get on a course like that, just ping me a message on LinkedIn and we'll keep you updated. And talking about LinkedIn, because all of you here volunteered for another Zoom call, 50 of you, on an afternoon, which is actually quite sunny here in UK, voluntarily to talk about psychometrics. If this is not a self-selecting sample, I don't know what is. So what I'd recommend, if you're comfortable, pop your LinkedIn handles into the chat so you can just connect with each other, because you clearly share a common interest in psychometrics and coaching strong enough to go for a Zoom call. And you can just pop it in, and next time you're bored during this call, statistically it's likely it's going to happen, you can go there and you can just connect with a whole bunch of people who share your interests. Okay, so what do we have? Limitations, we'll definitely cover at least 20 minutes on that. Okay, how to incorporate a client to buy sessions with Luminous Spark. Yeah, when do you use psychometrics? Yep, in the coaching process, absolutely. Learn more about Lumina, great. Either pop me a line or join with the same Zoom link tomorrow at 11 a.m. where we're just going to be talking about Lumina and Spark coaching. So tool specific. Practical use, improve current method. That's hopefully where we come to learn about one another and how we use it. Playfully brings the data from psychometrics. I like that somebody said playfully, because when you hear the word psychometrics, I have two flashbacks. One, when I was teaching a student, when I was a teaching assistant with kids with special needs, and my student was on the autistic spectrum, and he goes to me, "You like to use long words?" And I go, "Yeah." He says, "Would you like me to tell you why?" And I go, "Go on then." "To hide the fact you don't know shit what you're talking about." And to me, that's kind of like the best consultancy advice I ever got. And I work in psychometrics now, so I'm really always conscious about that. And Ross, I'm glad that got a giggle. Was it because of what I said, or you watching cat videos?
That was me, Nikita Devola, and I put the playful. I was one that made the comment, and the reason why is essentially for that reason. Absolutely, it's the fact that people generally tend to think that this is a psychoanalysis of them and who they are, as opposed to actually playfully get into that sense of so what, and how do we explore how that actually makes work and life more exciting, and find that creativity and joy in work as well. So how can you use that data? But yes, your comment to make me giggle.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with you, because psychometrics is not usually what people associate with fun and humor, but I think personality can be really funny. Actually, two of my colleagues and I, we created a stand-up show based around the Big Five, and we took it to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and we run 6 shows. We had only one person at our first show, and Margaret was great, but we had better attendance going forwards. But the key thing is that I think that using a bit of humor, I mean, not laughing at the person, like, look at your neuroticism score, isn't that funny? But actually, adding a bit of humor actually gives that a little bit more wiggle room, that sometimes what people need to help them develop and grow.
We'd definitely like to explore that a bit more with you, Nikita. I'll connect you offline with that. I think that's really cute. That's some things I'm thinking about. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, and more than happy to, because I think that people can take themselves far too seriously and not update their self-narrative. And I think having a bit of humor, a bit of entertainment, and actually loosens up some of this very strongly held belief a person has about themselves. So it's definitely worth exploring. Wonderful. So this is actually the key question I start any session with. It doesn't matter what tool I have. Starts with, how would you describe your personality? So I'm just curious what people would type into Mentimeter right now. What would be their answer to that question? Or some people might unmute themselves and want to share. In no particular order. Simon, because you're unmuted, how would you describe your personality? Or Aaron?
Sorry, was that me, Simon? I know.
Oh, yeah, let's go with you. Simon, yes, that was the plan, the Simon and the Christmas jumper. Because I forgot we have several Simons in the
call. I wasn't sure if it was me. Yes, so how would I describe my personality? Oh my God. When does the session finish? Well, that's a bit of a rabbit hole to delve into, isn't it? And I think, if I would draw upon my education and knowledge and probably just err towards the Big Five and just sort of lean on those, I'd say I'm fairly high on openness. I'm fairly low on extroversion, despite the Christmas jumper. you see, this has been making a real effort. I would say fairly high on agreeableness as well. Yeah, I'm curious. I like to learn, and I'm quite sort of person orientated. Yeah, despite being introverted, so I really value you know, good, strong relationships, and I enjoy that aspect of you know, working life as well as personal life.
Wonderful. Well, that's very much in line with my definition of introversion. I always say an introvert is an extrovert with good taste. Just more selective of who you want to spend your time with and what you want to show you're excited about. And about wearing the Christmas jumper, don't worry, we'll get onto that. The term is situational strength. But the key thing is here, what's really important is that I think when it comes to psychometrics, if you want to use them right, one of the first steps is to look at the name. Psychometrics. So it's a measuring of a psychological construct, but depending on which Wikipedia entry you read, psyche comes down to like the divine light of the individual within. So it's individuality. So as long as you put the psyche before the metrics, you're quite good. And to me, this is another key thing. This is why I always ask a person to describe themselves before I even open up the report. Because ultimately, this is what you work with. You're working with the self-narrative of the person. The psychometric data is only how it showed itself up in those hundreds of items they answered. But ultimately, what you're working with is a self-narrative, the stories the person tells about themselves to themselves. Of course, if you do 360 stuff, then you have ratings of what stories other people tell themselves about you, but that's slightly different. And we'll definitely touch upon that as well. And it has its uses. And but the key thing is it is self-narrative. So I would never say in psychometrics like you are this. I would say, you know, what I tend to notice with people with such personality scores are as follows. It's even the language we use. And I think that's what's very key. I noticed there's some studies that says like 16% of executives are self-aware. I think it's absolute and utter rubbish. I think everybody's self-aware. Whether they choose to share that with you as a coach, what they're aware about themselves, that's a different matter. And that's where such a things like rapport and psychological contract and other skills come into play. What's also really fun is that when personality, we ask people to describe their personality, they come up with, you know, I'm very complex, but when you ask them to write it down, it's only 2 or 3 words. It's also really fun which words people use to describe themselves. And extroverts quite often might go on for 5 minutes talking about themselves. That's also, I find, like, you know, and then this and then that. I'm just like, lovely, I'm on the clock, great. You know, why did I even pay for the psychometric? I can just work with this. Or some people might just say 3-5 words, just like that. And it's like, oh, well, what does those words mean for you? So you can kind of expand it slightly. And, but the key thing is, it's like, how does this play out? And we can see some people use a big 5, such as Simon. Some people use MBTI, and it's all terminologies. And that's the key thing. This is all different perspectives on the same matter. Because in my books, the first personality assessment ever is the zodiac. It's one question, when are you born? And it gives you 12 types. Myers-Briggs has only 4 types more. The key thing is that it's that kind of, people have been trying to grasp with that concept of personality for a long time. So we can learn a lot from it. Some people are fluid. Some people are potentially a bit more established. One person described themselves as Jekyll and Hyde. Well, you could describe that also as being emotionally intelligent, according to some theories. So it depends on the context. But we can see that there's, you know, sides which come up with extroversion, introversion. I also think this is what's really interesting, because I think one of the key things with psychometrics, when you get trained, they cover validity, reliability, test, retest, all that lovely stuff. But they don't cover what I think is very key, and I call it utilitarian validity. It's how useful is the information to the person? How useful was a report? And I find quite interesting when you sit down with a client and you ask them, have you done this assessment before? And usually people say, you know, I've done MBTI 5 times. It's like, great. And for me, the next question is, what letters change, which ones don't? Or even which letters you remember. And this is completely anecdotal, but it seems the biggest strength, let's say, like if you have like really high extroversion or really high introversion, the person will remember they're an E or an I. I think there's a degree of saliency to the traits you remember most because they're the most associated with you. It's quite interesting to explore that with the client, even just like what they remember, what has changed, what was useful to them, what's not so much, and building on their previous experience. And I find that from MBTI, what seems to be coming up more and more for people in one-to-ones is the difference between introversion and extroversion. And I think that in itself is very interesting. So, oh, somebody mentioned they're ambiverted. That's when you have a mix of both. But just looking at this page, does anybody have any thoughts or reflections?
But with the above definitions of burnout in mind, burnout can be defined as.
So how you can be defined, can you say a little bit more, Sandri, on that? If I pronounce your name correctly. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. No, it's a mistake. Sorry, my mic is on.
Oh, it's okay. It just would be, yeah. Is there any particular of those that stand out for you?
I like the one that stand out for me is curious, person orientated, fun. That one stands out for me.
Absolutely, because there's quite a few different adjectives being used.
Yes.
Absolutely, though everybody has a personality, however many adjectives they use. But what I find really interesting when you ask people to describe themselves, people who describe themselves as emotionally intelligent usually aren't that much. Also, people who describe themselves as really empathetic are usually not particularly empathetic, because people, it's like one of my favorite poets is Buddy Wakefield, and he says humble, but I guess humble people don't really use that word. Same with empathetic or emotionally intelligent, etc. It's usually what people try to put on a little bit more. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, they're trying, but don't necessarily take it at face value. So, as we move on, what do you consciously manage about your personality at work? Any thoughts come to mind? Like for me, I really try to listen. Like to me, listening is such an effort. Whenever I see on LinkedIn post 10 skills that don't take any effort, and one of them is listening, and I'm like, not if you're a bloody extrovert. So much effort just to shut up sometimes. My weirdness, oh, that's exciting. That's definitely a 1.5 hour session. Yeah, stop talking. Speaking for yourself or myself. Not talking too much, listening, being too detail orientated, what to share, not to share. Yeah, give space to others, listen to understand, not to respond. Yeah, I always say it's quite easy to love an introvert if you're an extrovert. To show them that you love them, just leave them alone for a bit. So conscientiousness, notice the people, being more concise, understanding different personalities. The key thing, we all manage something about ourselves. And that's what's really interesting, because this brings us to a question that clients have often asked. And that question is, when you open up the report, they go, is this my home self or my work self? And before, for literally years, I used to say, well, you know, test reliability, we really work on the items, but nobody really cares about that. And now I ask, how is it too different? And they're clearly different enough for them to ask me that question. And that's what makes it so much fun to explore. Sometimes that's more interesting to explore than the psychometric report. And sometimes people are more themselves at work than at home. So yeah, the plot thickens. But we all manage something. And if this doesn't come out, probably within half of the session, I will ask the person, what do they manage about themselves? And I still haven't met once. And I still haven't met a single person who said, I don't manage anything about myself. We're all trying. So then you could explore with a client, let's say, with a question, when was the last time you couldn't manage it as well as you wanted to? And it's quite an interesting area to explore. Also, why do people think they need to manage their personalities? And this is where somebody says they want to find out more about culture and psychometrics. And I think this is where culture comes in. To me, culture is like the barriers on the motorways that allow you not to go off the motorway. And these barriers control how much your personality is channeled to your behavior without being reprimanded. So let's say if you're forthright and to the point in, let's say, in a Dutch culture, that might be encouraged. If you're forthright in a British culture, not so much. So it's same display, but the same behavior is outside of those cultural limits which are set. And therefore, things like gender plays a part in this, and also race. Because quite often people feel they can only show a certain part of their personality based on how they feel they will be interpreted by that. And this is what's actually really need to be conscious about if you're in a coaching conversation of, if people say, well, I cannot do that. And you say, okay, what stops you? And there could be literally a whole variety of reasons why people manage their personality at work, in particular cultures, in particular settings. And it's very unique to each individual, the motivations behind this. And it's fascinating. Oh, somebody needs to manage their optimism. I'm so happy you said that. Yeah, I suggest have a neurotic friend. You know, when you can, when you say, well, you know what the worst that can happen? And the neurotic goes, let me count the ways. So it's the complement from each other. So now what we're going to move on to. So if you couldn't use the word personality, what words would you use? Preferences. Just like on your browser. Behaviors. What makes you you? By the way, if you want a good book on personality, there's a course on Audible called Why You Are Who You Are by Leary. It's not Timothy Leary, but same name. It's 21 lectures on everything Big Five, from genetics to brain structure to upbringing, clinical work performance. Really good. Tendency, essence. Hence we come to the psyche bit. Excellent. So would anybody mind unmuting themselves and sharing with us what kind of stands out for them in no particular order? Ross.
Hey, I wrote behavior, and I guess that's mainly because I used the discus behavioral assessment in my work. And so that's the first word that came to mind for me, as opposed to a personality profile or so behavior, but you know, an understanding of your behavior in different situations, how you respond to pressure. I guess in providing insights to your leadership style, you know, what value you add to a team, what problems or challenges you might bring to the team. So I guess behavior is a pretty broad concept, but that's the first word that comes to mind for me.
Excellent. And so the behavioral preferences. And I'm just curious.
Yeah, behavioral style, and how that changes, how your behavior changes under pressure.
Absolutely, because I think behavior is key, especially when other people are rating you. They can only see your behaviors. They're not seeing your personality behind it. They're just doing that. That's why one of my favorite quotes is by Kurt Vonnegut. He said, "We are the people who we pretend to be, so be really careful who you pretend to be." And I also noticed, Ross, and thank you, Nick, I noticed you have your hand up, so we'll just go to you after this one. You notice that the comment coaching across culture is very interesting in the South African context. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, you know, South Africa is known around the world. It's been a cross-cultural society, integration of, there's been an integration of many different cultures since '94, essentially. And there are still many challenges that professionals face when working and coaching people from cultures or backgrounds different to them. And I think in South Africa also there's a common perception that behavioral assessment tools and psychometrics don't necessarily take everybody into consideration. They are based on tests that were done amongst mostly European cultures. And so that's often a challenge especially when working in a team context and presenting the findings of your assessments. And obviously when there is doubt or uncertainty, that's one of the first challenges that a facilitator faces is how has this tool been validated in South Africa across different cultures?
Absolutely, this is so key. It's like, how was the tool developed? Where, when, what was the norm group used? Is it still applicable? Because some of these tools were developed even in the 1940s. We're not even talking about cross-cultural difference. We're talking about time cultural differences. And to be careful with those, I had a colleague of mine was asked a question in the selection questionnaire. Are you suspicious of ladies who wear rouge? I kid you not, that was an actual item he got asked in selection. And he was a psychometrician, so it was like, what that's supposed to measure? And you know what the assessor says? We don't know, but probably something about socializing. And he goes, in which decade? Well, that's, I added, I'm not sure he actually said that. But yeah, so make sure that you look at the items, you look at the cultural differences, you look when, where, how it was developed, and whether it's applicable to you. Thank you so much, Ross and Natalie, for mentioning it. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, hi. What I just wanted to put out there, so I'm not on Menti right now, so I use the word filters for people, because usually when you talk with people about personality, right, it's this self-discovery tool of, oh my God, that explains me to myself, or that explains why others react to me. Like, it's always the self-centered, like how the reflection comes back to you, right? But then we always have to remember that, especially with culture, and I work in the cultural context, is that we always judge everybody else by our own example, and then our personality becomes the filter through which we see others, and we need to take a step back because other people have other filters, right?
Absolutely. And quite often, oh, Dawn, you unmuted yourself. Would you like to jump in?
Well, I was just thinking about mini selves. I had a session a few months ago from Tatiana Bakarova, who was talking about mini selves in personality and in coaching, and being very careful. These, I think you triggered the thinking, Nikita, when you were talking about be careful of what you show in your personality. So, I'm just sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, if we've got all these mini selves that we keep to ourselves, how on earth do we get to those mini selves through psychometric testing?
The question is, who is watching the mini selves? And but to me, the key thing is I prefer language of roles.
Sorry?
I use the term roles.
Yes.
Because this is also parallel to actually where the word personality comes from. It comes from the word persona, which was the Greek masks. The actors were the original emojis. The ancient Egyptians might disagree, but basically, it's we all play different roles. So we're in different contexts. We act differently, and we'll definitely explore that. But yeah, and mini selves also really come into play with people who high on openness and agreeableness that we'll cover. So yeah, but the key thing here is that it's just so many different aspects. And as Nick was saying, filters. One of the key things you need to be super careful, and building on Ross's point about cultural differences, is know who written the assessment, and especially the reports. Because quite often now you complete an assessment, questions are skewed. All psychometrics are biased because they're all written by humans. And as far as I know, after talking with many of those authors, none of them had divine intervention in insight into the human condition. So all of the psychometrics are biased. And therefore, you need to look at the items the way they're written, such as the ladies who wear rouge question. See if the items are acceptable. There's one questionnaire that's really popular. There is an item there called, I wonder what makes the stars twinkle. Ask yourself, would you be comfortable answering that question? And if you're not, why should your clients be? So look through the items and also look why the questionnaire was built, when and how. Because I often say, quite often an assessment might be telling you, the report might be telling you much more about the author's personality rather than the client sitting opposite you. So talking about filters, be conscious of that, even when it comes to the psychometric itself. But to me, what's really kind of fun was coming across here is how many different terms we use, and the ability we're able to talk about personality for half an hour, even without defining what it was. And I think this is what makes personality quite a fun little topic. People can have quite different definitions of what they mean, but we can still talk about it. And so, but for my practice, the way I kind of define it, there's 4 levels. There's preference, what you like to do, such as if you're introverted and you like to spend time with small groups, that's one thing. Or you like to be creative, or you like to be in nature, etc. Or you like being organized. Then you have behavior, which is what you do. So you can be introverted, but you can connect really extrovertedly every day at work. But then please don't get angry at your colleagues that keep inviting you to the pub after work. Because you might be, don't they know how tired I am? Don't they know how much effort this is? It's like, nope. They just see the effort. They actually think you might enjoy it because you seem so excited during the day. Then you have the overextended or maladaptive, as Ross mentioned, who you are under stress. And some people change quite more than others. And I think especially with coaching, and I only added this after 10 years, I decided to add a new one. And this was after conversation with a guy called Roy Childs. And apparently some psychometrics, I believe, FIRO, it includes a thing, aspirational self, is who you want to be. And so, people say, well, I wish I was more extroverted. And the question is why? Or, I wish I had better attention to detail. But maybe it's better to pair up with somebody better attention to detail and work with them. Because I know if you read like Harvard Business Review and other publication, Popular Psychology, it will talk about you need to be tough, you need to be resilient, you need to be vulnerable, you need to listen, you need to speak up, you need to be empathetic, you need to be tough. So you need to basically have a mild case of schizophrenia to be all of those things at once. Instead of actually thinking, wait a second, how can we relate better to other people who have those traits and work together? Because I believe opposites often enter, especially going back to, for example, Dawn previously mentioned that she has been married for a number of years. So it's very likely that your personalities entered an almost symbiotic relationship at that point. Oh, Dawn, sorry, you were on mute. Unless you were swearing, then you can keep yourself on.
Extrovert, introvert.
Oh, what?
I'm extrovert, he's introvert.
Oh, nice. What does they say? It's not that extroverts make friends, they're get adopted by extroverts. So yeah. But yeah, so for example, it is fascinating. Like to me in relationships, it's so often that extroverts can perceive introversion as rejecting. Oh, Max.
Oh, yes.
That seems to have resonated with a few of you. Would you like to expand on that, good people?
I mean, I wouldn't mind going on that because as one who presents as my step 2 MBTI, very high on enthusiasm and optimism, all that kind of stuff. So I kind of present as being very extroverted. But actually, most times all I want to just do after a day of facilitation or conversation, just go hide away and actually just be quiet. And often times, oh, do you want to join us in the pub? Like, no, not really. Oh, you don't like us? And that struggle of constantly trying to actually explain that and navigate through that, and people not actually just thinking, oh, you're just rejecting friendships or you're a snob of some form. Yeah, that resonated significantly.
That's where projection comes into it.
Yeah.
And it tells you much more about them than it does about you.
Yeah.
Because that's actually a really fun aspect. I often find extroverts project onto introverts. It's because introverts, especially if you're poker faced, that poker face allows for like a canvas to project on.
Whatever you want to paint on it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh,
Yeah.
are you anxious?
Yeah.
Because when I deal with people who are like 99 percentile in introversion and not at all extroversion, especially emotional expression, I go, do people come up to you and say like, what are you worried about? Because all the freaking time, you know, or, you know, and it's like, well, maybe they're worried about something.
I do remember someone sharing a story which actually very much resonated, to an extrovert and introvert finishing a session together. And one saying to the other, oh, when I get back to the hotel, I'm just want to get a glass of wine. And you were saying, that's exactly what I'm going to do when I get to my hotel room. I'm going to order one in. And I was inviting you out for a glass of wine. You fool.
Exactly. I was ordering a bottle. Now I'm here with a bottle. I'm going to drink it because I don't want to go to waste. It's not environmentally friendly. Yeah, but it's most often in couples. If let's say an extrovert is working from home and an introvert has been all day in meetings trying to be excited about stuff they're not excited with, talking with people, and then they come back home and the extrovert can hear the key turn and they run up to them. It's like, let's go out, let's have some fun, let's go out, let's, you know. And the introvert just said, I just want a glass of wine and a book. And then the extrovert goes, do we have a problem? And the introvert is like, oh God, just not now. And you know, it escalates so quickly.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah. By the way, from Korea to Japan to UK, US, what animal do people often associate, introverts associate with extroverts? Oh, Jen, you're unmuted yourself. So what do you think?
Well, I was actually going to say that, like, what I've noticed is I've been married for a long time and I am an introvert, but my husband is an extrovert and I have learned to adapt. So like, that's my adaptation, is that I'm pretty high functioning. And a lot of times people don't realize I'm an introvert because I've just learned how to, it's so much easier to let them run out their energy than, you know, like they recharge off of the people connection, right? And I'm like, okay, like I have the space, I have the margin, like I know this is important. So, you know, like making that work, because like, you know, the combination of the personalities like can enhance yourself, you know, like it's not like, oh, well, this one's better or that one's better. It's like you really do need people and you need everybody's personality to kind of fill in the gaps where, you know, like where we're all built to be together. We're not built to be alone, even though it can be exhausting to people all the time.
Exactly. So it's all a question of time and how we complement each other. Thank you for that, Jen. And learned behaviors. But with learned behaviors, I always say there's this ancient Chinese proverb, and I know it's true because I read it on Facebook, is that between every two people, there's 10 steps, and it's up to each one to make 5. And often, especially if you're a bit higher and agreeable, you make like 11. And the other person thinks it's fine until in one of this evening you go, don't you understand how much effort it was? And they're like, what? I thought you were happy. Jesus Christ. So, and I noticed you were unmuting yourself.
No problem. You carry on. You carry on. I'm just enjoying it. I want to say, wow.
Thank you. Ego needs love too, but it's everybody's participation. But the animal that introverts often associate with extroverts is a Labrador. And I find it so fun because it's so international. But if you ask an extrovert what animal introverts associate with extroverts, they go lions. So extroverts see themselves as lions, but introverts see them as Labradors. And I find that quite cute in its own right. So we have this 4 different levels. Then we need a model. And to me, we can go with the Big 5, created originally from a study of Allport and Oldbird. They picked up the English dictionary in 1930s. The reason they did this is because they thought that if there's a word for us to have a difference between us as humans, if there's something of importance, some difference between us, we should have a word for it. So picked up the English dictionary, identified every word they could pick that they thought was to do with personality. They picked 17,908 words. And then what started is a factor analysis to see which words go together. And out of this factor analysis, tools like 16PF appeared at 1949 with Cattell. Then you had NEO, which appeared from that as well in 1970s. And around 1980s, we kind of thought that there's a big five. Now, by the way, before we go to a theory, I want a little public service announcement. How can you tell an article about psychology is full of crap? Because it starts with all psychologists agree that. Psychologists never agree on anything. That's one of the beauties of the profession. What I'm about to show is just a model. That's it. It's like some sort of like miniature amount of agreement is made that this sort of kind of is there. But the thing is, this is personality psychology. We try to be a science, but my dad says it isn't. He's a professor of applied mathematics and physics, but this conversation is for my therapy room, not for you guys. Don't want to burden you. But the key thing is here is that maybe in 3 years it's going to be the big 6. Maybe in 10 years it's going to be the big 3. We don't know, because our level of understanding is improving in this field. So what are the big 5? So basically, the 17,908 words were found to gravitate loosely around 5 factors. One is neuroticism. So it's propensity for threat and risk and propensity for negative emotional affect. So neurotics feel negative emotions more often. It doesn't mean that low neurotics don't, but as my good friend, good colleague, Gordon Curfew says, the level of your neuroticism is the length of your fuse, and I'm not being Freudian about it. So what it basically shows is how much pressure you can take before you explode, before you get anxious. So low neurotic people can put up with more stuff before they get anxious and angry, etc. But this is what's very important when coaching. Low neurotics need love too, because with low neuroticism, they don't necessarily have the coping mechanisms that high neurotics do. Because we're in coaching, so we're dealing with people who are functioning, people who are at work. You know, they're functioning a part of their lives. We're not dealing with clinical cases. That's a very different entity. And the key thing here is that those high neurotics are making it work. So they likely know their negative emotions. They have coping mechanisms. Some are more healthy than others. But low neurotics, when stuff happens, they might not even recognize negative emotions. They don't have the coping mechanisms. And worse yet, their friends think they're going to be fine because they're the resilient ones. And quite often you find that it's your low neurotic friends who need help the most when, you know, somebody dies, there's a divorce, especially the ones who weren't expecting because they think everything was going just fine. And all of that stuff, it's actually low neurotic colleagues who also need help. Then we have extroversion, which is propensity for positive emotional affect. So extroverts are more excitable, let's say. Also, they need more stimuli from their senses. It's called cortical arousal. It's how much stimuli you need from your senses in order to feel engaged with the world. And extroverts need more stimuli than introverts. So I always say in an open office, you can spot an extrovert by what I call the meerkat effect. When they feel understimulated, they'll stand up and they start looking around who they can talk to. It's nothing personal, it's just stimuli. And God forbid there's an introvert between meetings having a cup of coffee by themselves and looking out of the window. And the extrovert goes, they must be lonely. And as we discussed, introverts, you just have a better taste about selection. Openness, it's all about that curiosity that Simon touched upon, exploration of new ideas. Now, people low on openness, it doesn't mean they're not creative, but they're likely to look at the problem first. So they're more likely to be focused on the here and now. The high openness, they also say, oh, I'm so evidence-based. I look at research and I go, do you have your hypothesis first and then look at research? And they go, oh yeah, that's me. So idea comes first, reality is second. Also, what's really important with high openness individuals is they think they're logical, but it's their own logic. So they're likely to experience what's known as lateral thinking. So their mind go from A to D and miss B and C. But they go, it's self-evident there's B and C between A and D. So they go, A, D, Z, X, good, any questions? It's like, that meeting went well. It's like, why is not anybody doing what I thought they would be doing? So actually how they can break it down, like pairing up, I was once having a client says, oh yeah, but you know, I have somebody pragmatic on my team. So what I do after a presentation, I take her aside and I explain it in the terms she understands. Because that wasn't condescending at all. How about you have a coffee with her before you present and see if there's anything missing? Oh, well, extroverts about taking punches at extroverts. I'm a neurotic extrovert. Self-depreciation is what I do about my personality traits. Pure narcissism there. Then you have agreeableness. Agreeableness is fascinating. So agreeableness is actually how much importance you place on relationships outside of your immediate circle. So this is what's really important. Like people who score low on agreeableness, it doesn't mean they're not empathetic or caring. They're just extremely selective of who they care about. I'll explain it. I was doing a session and we had the leader of a team. He scored 2 percentile on empathy, 99 percentile on logic. I had to check his ears. He wasn't a Vulcan, discreetly, of course. But the key thing was that everybody in his team, he says these results are wrong. And everybody says, yes, they're wrong. John is the most empathetic leader we ever had. So explain, well, it's about the in-group. So you have your close group. Often people call it like the clan, the tribe, clique, all of that. And it's like 5 to 10 people, close friends, close family, close colleagues. And everybody else, it doesn't mean you're misanthropic and negative towards them, nothing like that. It's just you don't need that emotional bond with them in order to have a productive relationship. And then John goes, oh yeah, that's me. And the person next to him goes, John, that's really mean. And he turns to them and he goes, but you're part of the in-group. What are you worried about? So it's that difference. And it's like, it's hard to win their trust. And, you know, it takes a bit to get into the inner circle. And then you have conscientiousness, which is often referred to as grit. So people who are highly conscientious, they can do stuff they don't like. That's good. Negative side, they can do it for a very long time. Those people can put up with a lot of crap. And whenever I deal with highly conscientious clients, I go, just because you think you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And people low on conscientious, it doesn't mean they're not productive. They just really need a deadline or motivation. One of my favorite quotes, and I'm not sure how legit it is because it's down a grapevine rather than an official source. Apparently, this is what, remember the Airbus 320s that landed on the Hudson? So when the Airbus, the engines were down because the geese flew into them. They're over downtown New York, plane full of fuel. And the captain, Sully, played by Tom Hanks, decides to ditch. The first officer pulls out the right manual to open up the ditching procedure and starts it. So the right manual, the right page, etc. And when people did this, and he did this in like 6-7 seconds. And when people tried to repeat this in simulator, it took them like 20 seconds. And the first officer was asked, what was your secret? He goes, I was exceptionally motivated on that day. So it's about motivation as well. But when you're coaching clients, especially in teams, it's important they discuss this because the highly conscientious will start the project after they get it. The low conscientious will wait till the deadline. At that point, the high conscientious got so stressed they did the part of the low conscientious. So it's that kind of, when do you start? And all of the things exist together. So they're all intercorrelated, and that's what makes it fun. Like I had one client who scored really low on neuroticism, really high on extroversion, really, really resilient, chatty. But to me, the fun thing in coaching is to ask, how do you deal with people who are opposite to you? So I said, how do you work with people more emotionally dynamic than you are? And he goes, oh, it's so simple, Nikita. And I go, can you tell me more? And he goes, when they come to me with their emotions, by the way, when people use their emotions, it's a little interesting thing. And again, when they come to me with their emotions, I tell them 2 things. And I go, which are? He goes, 1, nobody died. 2, they should grow up. As my friend Paul Harris says, it's very hard to define what emotional intelligence is, but it's very clear when people don't have it. And I said, but what if this doesn't work? He goes, I just send them to HR. So the key thing here, it's a big 5. They exist, they're intertwined, and they're well connected. And you can think of them as like, each factor is like a sun. And you have all the different kind of facets, words floating around them. It's kind of like a point of gravity for positive emotions, extroversion and stimuli, neuroticism for negative emotions and risk perception, agreeableness for all about the humans and interactions and relationships, openness for creativity, and conscientiousness. Now, what's also quite fun is the 2 factors. So when we correlate the big five, we get plasticity, which is high extroversion and high openness, and stability, which is high conscientiousness, high agreeableness, low neuroticism. Now, this to me looks a lot like growth mindset, fixed mindset. So I pencil it onto that. So growth mindset is all about plasticity. But I think what's really important that we accentuate the importance of fixed mindset, and I call it nurturing. Or you can have growth is innovation, stability, or fixed is implementation. And you need both. Because otherwise, if we just go with growth mindset, it's really biased towards high extroversion, high openness, instead of actually seeing the value that implementing ideas brings. And you can also overplay it. I think that if you overplay the kind of the nurture and implementation, it can become fixed. But you can also overplay growth mindset, that becomes chaos. So another key thing is that if you gain a bit of knowledge about personality psychology, you can see how personality models can be intertwined with other things like growth mindset, resilience, stress, etc. And this is one of the benefits of using a big five model or any model, because you can go to Google Scholar and you can type in personality, stress, personality, resilience, personality, and Ostrow's personality. You know, it could be anything. And there's a study on this. So by having a better knowledge of personality, you can gain a lot of knowledge from the research and intertwine it. Then we also have the big one. So you can collapse all the scores into one score on personality. Nobody exactly knows what the hell it tells us, but we can statistically. So we can distill everything to the one score, but it doesn't mean we have to do it. Any questions about Big Five before we move on to the practical side of things? Great. The reason there's a silence because I count to 15 in my head after asking any questions, because my default setting is any questions, good, moving on. So, and it's all standardly distributed. So what it means is that 16 to 84th percentile is the average range. And if you score above 84th, you're a bit above average. If you score below 16th percentile, you're below average. So you're not particularly fast. And usually psychometric results, you know, come out across this. So just as a little exercise, if you saw scores like this, what questions would you have to explore in the coaching process? Any takers? Somebody who scores really high neuroticism, extroversion, openness, and like nothing on agreeableness or conscientiousness. In no particular order. Nikki, what are you thinking or watching on your phone? Whichever one comes first.
I was looking down. I was like, all right.
Okay.
I'm intrigued. I mean, I guess I'm curious as to, does this person have this in front of them, or is this my interpretation of what I'd expect to see?
You can go for either one.
Well, I'd be really curious to see what their take on it is, and to get their thoughts around it. And it would probably be quite interesting if they are highly extroverted and open. I imagine they'd perhaps be open to talking about it and exploring what that looks like. So that might be something they're more comfortable doing, and exploring for themselves and seeing what it means to them. But I'd be very curious. It seems to be quite a strong sense on either direction for those 5 different facets. So what does that mean to them? How does that show up for them? What does that look like? Would be fascinating.
Absolutely. And this is what's so cool. It's leveraging their strengths of preference, that curiosity. If they're curious by nature, why not get them curious about their reports?
Yeah.
If they like to talk about themselves, why not get to explore that as well? So it's kind of leveraging their scores to even help the exploration process. And hopefully I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Dimola, what are your thoughts?
I was really struck by the openness and agreeableness, just the chasm between the two. I think there's a powerful opportunity to leverage the two. If one is curious about ideas, how does that play out in their agreeableness towards other people as well? I'll be curious as well as where the tensions lie in some of the work they do, seeing that they're so low on that conscientiousness and how that works in teams in their life. I was just curious actually how knackered they are with such high level of extroversion and openness and such little the agreeableness being where it is as well. So yeah, this would be a fascinating conversation for us to explore. It actually sounds like a lot of fun in that respect.
Absolutely. And for example, with openness and low agreeableness, they might not be empathetic about people, but they might be really interested in them.
I guess, yeah.
So it's how it can play out as well. And with low conscientiousness, I always say, you know, when people score this low in conscientiousness, I go, all this shows us is that you have half an hour of willpower a day. So you really need to be conscious how you use it.
Really fascinating.
Thank you. Any other thoughts about the profile? Aaron, you seem to be nodding. Anything in particular?
I'm just appreciating what you said about conscientiousness and willpower. I think about that a lot in terms of my own life. So I found myself being curious about how I would score on that. Yeah, and just resonating with it. I have always eschewed psychometric tests, preferring to sort of be in the dance of subjectivity with a client and kind of being with them and learning how they understand themselves and relate to their world. But I'm appreciating your breakdown of these assessments and models. And what I am personally holding, I mentioned this in the chat, I don't know if we'll have time, but I'm really curious about leveraging these ideas in a systemic way. So when we're working at the level of teams and organizations, you know, self-awareness may or may not be that much of an end in its own right, but actually supporting a team or a team culture to utilize that ongoingly in order to understand how the team works together or is failing to work together is something I'm really interested in learning more about.
Well, definitely, because by the way, these events are monthly. So we can focus the next month's event exactly on that topic.
Oh,
because
awesome.
Because the key thing is with personality, I say self-awareness is only not even half. It's the question, how do you deal with people opposite to you, especially in teams? And sometimes we develop like almost like team cultural norms, what people don't like. And I use a model which looks at what you like, positive aspects of personality, but also how the opposite might see you. So under stress, logical people can be seen as argumentative. And when you tell them you're being argumentative, they go, no, I'm not. Same as people being overly dramatic. When you tell them you're being dramatic, my response is, no, I'm not. And after this, I slam the door and walk off in a huff. But it's how the opposite seizes you and where the biases might be. Like my favorite, how it shows up is whenever somebody says, Nikita, can you come in and talk to us about Gen Z? And usually it's, or because, okay, better example of this. I work a lot with investment bankers. They're a fun bunch of people. So, okay, so was a little bar called Old Bar One. It's now being renovated in Canary Wharf where the bankers gather. And I'd hear the same conversation in different guises next to me whenever I was a pint after doing a workshop. And the conversation goes something along those lines. I wasn't too harsh, was I? No, they need to learn. Plus, if they think they have it hard, they have no idea how we had it in our 20s. And usually, let's say it's somebody low on agreeableness, being low on agreeableness, piss somebody off. Instead of talking to them, they go for a pint with somebody very similar to them. And it puts the world to right. Or I was working with another group of investment bankers, quite senior level. And one of them goes, I think I got it. And his colleagues go, what? Remember some guy came to us, some consultant a couple of months ago and said, we're assholes to millennials. And the other ones go, yeah, so what? He goes, I'm starting to suspect we're assholes to more than just millennials. I was like, well, that's an aha moment. So it's this kind of biases which show up on a group level, which can be really interesting to explore. And so thank you for that, Aaron. So yeah, probably the next one was going to be about, I'll put on LinkedIn, it's going to be about the 15th of January.
Sounds great.
And it's all going to be about team application and how it plays out. So I think somebody mentioned before Roy Childs, and he mentioned something so key about psychometrics, because when we see percentiles, when we talk about percentiles, we see them as a unit of measurement. And as people, we're used to defined units of measurements, such as kilograms or pounds or centimeters. So psychometrics don't work that way because the numbers are not that precise. By the way, the first psychometric lab was proposed to be in the University of Cambridge by Cattell, not the 16PF guy. There were two Cattells with psychometrics in the beginning of 20th century. Funny that. And basically what the Senate threw out his proposal because they said, what you are proposing is putting the human soul on a pair of scales. And psychometrics don't work that way. I prefer, as Roy calls this, squishy numbers. So measurements are usually hard numbers, but psychometric results are squishy because they're impacted by all sorts of things. There's a thing called measurement error. So we're never 100% precise, not close. Another thing is, as we mentioned about what personalities we change, there's a lot of things we change about ourselves. So it's squishy numbers. Because just as a kind of little temperature check, what sort of things influence the way you behave? Feel free to unmute yourself and you can share as well. Previous experience, absolutely. Other people, well, yeah, we're social creatures. Pressure, energy, trauma, absolutely. Culture, sleep. Yeah, it's just like right now, when people say, oh, this person is doing this to piss me off, highly likely they're just tired. And being hungry. Oh, yeah. So there's a lot of factors going on. And if you dive down with a client, you can always ask, well, what's pressurous to you? What is too little sleep? Because it's all very subjective. What environment? When are you more different with which people? And so whenever you look at those numbers, sometimes we get into the trap of seeing them as other hard numbers, like measurements like centimeters and kilograms, but they're not. They're squishy numbers. There's so many things which can affect it. And that's when it becomes interesting. But there's research being done into this field. So if you're interested, first of all, there's Walter Mischel. So he proposed, at first he said, psychometrics have such low correlations, they're useless with real world. But then he kind of changed his tune, apparently after one of psychometric publishers chased him around till he cried in a Snowden hotel. But that's hearsay. But I found that story to be quite interesting. Anyways, but he basically proposed the if-then theory. So basically, your personality is consistent in consistent setting. So let's take three settings: a funeral, a queue in a shop, and the party. And let's take introversion, extroversion. People who are ambiverted will adapt accordingly. They'll appear somber at the funeral, orderly in the queue, and lively at the party. Introverts will be somber at the funeral, appear somber at the queue, and be somber at the party until they have a couple of drinks and stop socializing with the cats and socialize with humans. Because actually alcohol increases your cortical arousal threshold, so you can put up with more stimuli. So you literally numb yourself. Not that I'm advocating alcohol as a coping mechanism for extroversion and introversion. And if you have an extrovert, they'll be center of attention at the party. They'll start conversations in the queue, and they'll make inappropriate jokes at the funeral. Potentially. So it's in specific contexts, your personality is more predictive. Then you have trait activation theory, which is behavioral expression of a trait requires arousal of that trait by trait relevant situational cues. I don't think they could have put the word trait more in that sentence. But basically what it says that if your job requires you to be creative, openness will be correlated with that. But if you work in a factory line and you don't have a lot of space to be creative, and your job doesn't call upon it, your personality will not be that predictive of your performance. And if you're interested, there's Tet and Guterman who do research in that regard, and Burnett. Then you have personality strengths, which basically says the forcefulness of implicit or explicit internal cues regarding desirability, Jesus Christ, how can I get copy and paste wrong? I mean, seriously, the desirability of potential behaviors. So what it says, as far as I interpret it, though of course we can just talk to Dalal, he's very friendly on LinkedIn, is let's say if you're 99th percentile on extroversion, you might find it much harder to listen if you're a 50th percentile. So it's very hard for you to go the other way. And this is where I think that, especially when you deal with quite strong preferences, it's important that you focus on other people who can bring this to the table. So, and then, as we previously mentioned, for example, Simon's reindeer top or Santa's top is what's called situational strengths. So it's implicit or explicit cues provided by external entities regarding the desirability of potential behavior. So rule structures cues, and I think this is where culture comes in, is how we do stuff around here, aka what's acceptable, what's not. And if you're interested by that, there's really interesting stuff by Meyer et al. 2010. So, and Judge and Zapata found that personality is more predictive of performance in situations with weak situational strengths. So what do I mean by this? So for example, there's one study done that, shows that the correlation between personality and performance is like, 16-15% of performance, correlation of 0.4 max. But if it comes to personality and blog writing is 0.8. So basically, the more freedom you have, the more you're likely to act on your personality. So ultimately, being ability to act on your personality is a luxury to an extent. Because if you're in a situation with strong situational strength, there's no space for your personality. And I think it's quite an interesting aspect. And personality is less predictive in situational with high situational strength. And specific traits also predict performance in jobs that activate particular traits. So if you basically get hired with the traits you have for a job where it's desired, I think that kind of explains a bit of the strength movement. But hey-ho. But I think what's most important is when you look at personality as a dynamic entity, because let's say when you come to coaching, and now we're going to come to coaching. So if I'll pause the share. So when it's static, when it's just a screenshot, when it's just you look at it as a profile on a page, there's not much. But if you take in all those dynamics, all those contexts in the coaching conversation, try to understand how it changes, how people change, how they adapt to their environments or don't. That's when personality becomes really interesting and fun. So we need to think of something as dynamic. So when we come to coaching, oh, by the way, before I stop with coaching, research has been shown that your personality can change. Here's some things. One, therapy decreases your neuroticism, increases your extroversion. So quite considerably. So if you have a client who's struggling with both, you might want to recommend therapy. I always have quite a few therapists that I recommend to my clients to choose from. Retirement increases openness and agreeableness, especially in men. So whenever I do a workshop, I say, men, don't wait to retire to have a hobby and be nice to people. But what's really interesting is that this relationship is likely to be mediated by other factors like genetics. So it's quite interesting that it might be some people are more changeable than others, basically. Right. So now, what does coaching mean to you? How would you define what you do as a coach? In no particular order, Dawn. How would you describe coaching?
I'm the facilitator of a conversation. Sorry, I'm a facilitator that allows people to think, to look inwardly, to have the conversation with them they need to have to find the answers they have within. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a rescuer, I'm a facilitator of their internal thinking.
Yeah. So facilitator, kind of like a co-explorer as well.
Yeah, I'd say it's coaching is a sounding board. And one of my professors, I always just remember if I'm ever in the situation, she says that a coaching relationship is where you sit on both hands, both your hands, and let the coachee do all the work.
Nice. But sometimes it's so much work to sit on both of your hands.
Reinhard Stelter talks about dialogue partners rather than coach and coachee. And he talks about conversations, sort of facilitating co-creative conversations.
I really like that framing, Dawn.
Sorry?
I really like that framing of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's Reinhard Stetler, The Art of Coaching, sorry, the Art of Dialogue, and his theory is third generation coaching.
Love it.
Could you put them to chat?
Yes, I will do.
Perfect. So there's different definitions as well. We have help people to have good lives, and look in someone thinking. A question asking machine, probably that person scores quite high on openness. Space to think out loud, given time off, prompting someone to know themselves, helping someone realize their awareness and responsibility, find their options. Yeah, it's beautiful because, again, coaching, just like personality, can mean a lot of different things for different people. So when it comes to coaching and psychometrics, in your practice and from your opinion, what are the benefits of using personality assessments? In that process?
I'm just going to take a stab at that. Just picking up from Don's very helpful framing of it. I think it's that having data to get a conversation started. Been spending quite a lot of time with Shine's humble series, the humble inquiry, humble dialogue, and all that one. But it's a place where we allow the data to actually drive the conversation, not the own stuff we're bringing into it, which can actually be powerful in so many ways. And I think just gives us it's a signpost, something to actually tools to give people to actually just use, make sense of where they are. And that self-awareness piece, where they're not just aware of themselves, but aware of others as well in the room. Data
exactly. And how they can be perceived.
Yeah.
I would also say that it is a good place to start. But for example, something I started doing, I stopped looking at psychometric reports before I meet the person.
Yeah.
We open it together and we go through it together. So I don't have any preconceptions before coming in.
And I think that's where that powerful co-creation bit comes in that respect. We're discovering together and making sense of it as we go through it, not me instructing.
Exactly. Otherwise, it's just a power dynamic. Because
Yeah.
I was talking to a therapist, because I'm not a big fan of dark side measures or claim to be dark side, because I think in order to make a judgment whether it's something effective or ineffective, you need to know the context. And if you don't know it, you don't know what's a strength and what's a derailer. And I go, why do people use dark side measures? And he goes, it's not about psychometrics, man. It's about power, because it gives the practitioner an illusion that they know something the client doesn't know about themselves. And I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
So being conscious of the power dynamics is quite key. So I remember one time I said, I was tired, did 5 sessions. And at the end of the session, I said, and if you have any questions about your personality, just let me know. She's like, what? So any questions about myself? You're the person to go to. And I was like, yeah. I was like, so if you have any questions about personality, let me know. I wasn't supposed to say your, but it just slipped in. And I was like, interesting. So, yeah. And now, so we can see some goodness. What do you think are the dangers?
I like what I can't remember her name, lady that shared earlier on about the I think what prompted your quote about the Chinese quote about 10 steps between people.
Yeah.
The danger of actually just going, this is all a person is, and not forgetting actually obviously what we get out of that is preferences, innate tendencies, and not necessarily all that we are. And I think sometimes we pick on go, oh, I'm an introvert, so I can be you know. Yeah.
I don't need to go to any social gatherings and shove that Christmas party because I'm an introvert. Yeah, exactly. It's like, to me, what's really important when people have such strong identities is what does it give them?
Yeah.
Which is always interesting. So what do they get from being identified so strongly as an introvert? And how often they update this? That's what I find fascinating, because this self-narrative, people might have been telling themselves for years, decades sometimes, and they never challenge it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so how often they update it? We update our software on our devices very often, but how often do we update the narrative we have of ourselves? Shirley, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in a little personal experience of where personality assessments can be dangerous. And that is, I've always identified in personality assessments with myself is that I'm low on persuasion, for example. And so I've therefore convinced myself that I cannot sell. And I've actually walked around saying, well, I have my own business, but unfortunately I cannot sell because that's what my personality assessment says. And I've just realized how I actually put myself in a box, and it was actually a limiting belief that I created out of seeing that from the personality assessment. So just that danger of how a personality assessment can actually create limiting beliefs, where in a coaching situation, we are trying to uncover those limiting beliefs. So the personality assessment and the coaching session can sometimes be worlds apart.
Yeah, and it's how the tool is used, especially if a person hasn't explored their personality before, and the coach or the person feeding back the tool delivers it with strong level of confidence, that can actually impact the self-limiting beliefs. And I'm just curious, what helped you to kind of get over the self-limiting belief? Or you're just selling and successful as a business?
No, actually, the funny thing is that coaching, actually going to coaching myself, actually made me realize that that was a self-limiting belief, and that just in the way I interact with people, I'm constantly selling ideas in the way I persuade. And it is actually something that's incredibly natural. I think I just put this box around me. I cannot sell, you know. And it was the coaching process that actually allowed me to move past that.
Excellent. And probably with the business as well, you were already selling. And whenever you're telling people, I cannot sell, and they're like, but your business is doing well. How are you making that work?
I've got all these clients, I'm doing all this work, but I cannot sell.
Exactly. And they're just like, what's going on with her? Yeah. So yeah, it's this kind of how to actually transcend those beliefs. What's not working for you anymore? And this is what I find so fascinating, because when we come to things like maladaptive behavior, quite often people go, it's a derailer, it's bad. But the thing is, a person has it for a reason. That means in some context early in their life, it worked for them. The context might have changed and they haven't updated that narrative. Thank you for that. And Frederick, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I hope it's not too noisy around here. So just given that there was a comment about sales, and that's specifically what I coach on, I've noticed the very few things that can't be overcome with a few extremely simple reframes. So in the niche I'm in, I've got a bunch of clients who are not good at selling, they're good at maintaining clients, but they call themselves, so in finance, they talk about farmers instead of hunters. And some of the best hunters I've trained were farmers who hated the salesy side, but just with some reframes of, these are people who need your help. Here are some questions to ask so you can feel comfortable. So we adapt everything to your personality. They've got much better results than people who overextend themselves into being salesy. So with a lot of these, I'd say how to put it, with looking at how Lumina works, it helps us be aware of some of the traits we have. A few reframes helps find better balance. And that can also be between, if you're logical, it's a good idea to understand how people function so they understand your logic. So you use the people side to be able to calibrate the logic, which is the logical thing to do once we see the logic, and that produces fantastic results.
Absolutely. It's this little reframes and tweaks that can have the biggest difference. And that sometimes people who hate salespeople are brilliant at sales because they're not sales people in traditional sense. So there's a lot of dangers which comes with using psychometrics and lots of opportunities. And what can we do? So here's some steps we're going to go through. So first is choosing the assessment, building the psychological contract, interpreting the data, exploring results with the client, and next steps. So what do you consider when choosing an assessment? What comes to your mind? Apart from what I'm qualified in and what points I have on the system, so I don't need to pay for extra. So, yeah. There's a lot of them on the market. What are we trying to measure? That's key. What do we mean by personality? Are we trying to measure behavior, maladaptive responses, emotional intelligence? What data do they have already? Such as maybe they use psychometrics recently, and maybe there's some performance data, maybe some KPIs, maybe there's a feedback structure. What's the purpose of the assessment? What sort of language resonates best with them? Yeah, absolutely. This is all key things to consider. A tool which opens, not limits. Yeah, I very much agree. I always say if there was only 16 types of humans on this planet, would have died out a long time ago. So to me, it's very important that a psychometric is a tool of self-expression rather than putting you in a box. Purpose, culture fair or not, validity, succinctness, accessibility. Yeah, not full of psychobabble. Oh yeah, that often happens. Like this person may or may not do this under a full moon, and you know, it's what are the reliability and validity of the data? Absolutely, validity and reliability are super important. From my side, I always say this is the following things to consider. One, do you actually need one? Because maybe, you know, the person is self-aware enough, there's no time for it, and we don't actually know how it's going to be used. How much freedom do you have in choosing an assessment? Often goes, well, we'll use this tools, so you're going to use it. So it's like, you know, and in this case, I always say, give them a demo of the tool you like. Because there's a saying in Eastern Europe, for a man who never tasted anything sweeter than a carrot. Because sometimes the best the psychometrics they use is the limit they've ever seen. So give them an experience with a tool you prefer and see their reaction. When were the psychometrics items last updated? This is super important because like that question of what ladies wear rouge, some items are not updated for decades and language changes. Also cultural sensitivity. Let's say if you have an item that I like to socialize in the pub and you're applying in one of the countries with quite strict alcohol limits with no pubs, you're then not measuring items about socializing. It's a cultural thing. Also translations. A colleague of mine, Wendy, she was telling me about they were translating the questionnaire into French. And there was an item, I'm not afraid of hard work. And they sent it to French office workers and they all disagreed. And all the British researchers were like, the French are lazy. But they gave the questionnaire to a French native. It's like, of course they said no, because you translated hard work as hard manual labor on a farm and you sent it to city workers. So be really careful of the items. If you're going to be using a different language, if you have a friend that speaks that language, ask them to run through it. Just be sure what you're asking your clients, what support the publisher can give, because this, especially when you get first trained, it's very key. Ask them what co-interpretation, co-delivery, what support they can give. You're paying them money, make them work for it. So how much time does it cost and return useful information? If you're having an hour coaching engagement, but it takes a client 2 hours to fill out the reports, maybe not the best use of the time. Maybe not have more coaching engagement in a shorter questionnaire. And it's good to have a few tools in your toolkit. Would anybody like to add anything to this one?
Yes, Nikita, I would. I've got a very good practical example of a person that I've been coaching who I felt was unfairly beating herself up. You know, she probably was listening to her internal critic a bit more than she needed to. And so I'm sorry, we're having a bit of a Roy Child's love in here, aren't we? But I used his emotional intelligence paired emotional intelligence questionnaire, with the view of hopefully her paired person would give her some feedback, which was in the positive rather than the negative in the way that she saw herself. And it was incredibly, incredibly powerful, because that paired person gave her just that. You know, there were some places where they both agreed with each other, but there was another place where, or other areas of the questionnaire, where she was really surprised and really pleased with the feedback that she'd been given. And so I think it's that's a very strong use of personality.
Absolutely, it's the gratefulness. This is what I absolutely love doing with team settings. So right now, using Menti, what I do on online sessions, I go through each team member and I ask people to write down what they're grateful for this person brings to the team, what trait, and then everybody unmutes and shares with that person what they bring. And then you ask them to play back. People just want to be seen and seen for their efforts. And when they feel seen, it's a completely different dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but this is a key thing with highly neurotic people, because one of the pillars of neuroticism is a negative self-construct.
Yes.
So you're more likely to be biased to get information which is negative about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get your performance review, where do you go? Areas of development or your strengths? And they go areas of development, and they go, which ones do you remember a week later? Areas for development, because it's a bias. So whenever same advice I give to people who are low neurotic, working with highly neurotic colleagues, whenever you give them any positive feedback, ask them to play it back to you in their own words. Make sure it went through. Otherwise, they'll just kind of keep on the negative. Yeah, absolutely. There's other ways to challenge the self-construct, such as the feedback from others. Because often people who have strengths but are a bit neurotic, they go, when I get feedback, they say, I'm good at this, I'm good at that, but isn't everybody? Well, if it was everybody, maybe it wouldn't be in your performance review. So, right, we'll just quickly skip this one, because this comes to building psychological contract. So it's how the person is invited. Because quite often people are sent like, just do it. And people then, it's not a good psychological contract. So what has the delegates been told before? Being transparent as possible, allowing for delegates to ask questions. So whenever I'm doing a program with people completing psychometrics, I always have a Q&A before the link goes out. Because statistical distribution, if you have like 100 people, 20% will have most of the questions. And then people comes like, are you going to sell the data? Who sees it, etc. So I can answer those questions. And then I put all those answers into the invitation email that goes out to everybody. So it kind of builds that relationship a little bit better. And spending a bit of time on those emails is very key. I was just having a friend, Ben, was sharing that they were doing assessment for selection for interesting role, but what they found is that people from minorities dropped out from the assessments. They didn't even take it, because it was like, this is an assessment for selection for this job, until they rechanged the words, talking about Frederick's a little reframing. It's like, oh, here's an opportunity to get more understanding about the role, for how it is to be, would like for you to imagine how you would perform when you would be in this position, and we look forward to reading your results and interpreting them together, or something like that. So they changed it, and the completion rates would then equal between minority and non-minority group. So just changing the words in the invitation can play such a big part. All right, what's the first thing you look at in the report? When you get your psychometric result, or your client's result, for that matter. Oh yeah, great. That can backfire sometimes. The name extremes, the spiky bits. Yeah, the trends. So if people are asking very strong over the social desirability score. Oh, interesting. Yeah, first few pages. Yeah, social desirability is interesting. I take it with a pinch of salt, because those items are not usually factor analyzed. They're just said like, this person cannot answer it right. I had once a client who, because social desirability scholars is like, I never lie, I never talk behind people's back, etc. Nobody can say no to those. But I had a client who scored so high on social desirability because said, I never talk behind people's back, etc. It's like, what is this about? And her reply was, because my parents raised me right. So it was not social desirability. It was very ingrained values she had about acting right. Oh, the name spelled correctly, yeah. So yeah, extreme scores are interesting to watch, but also be conscious about response pattern. Some people answer 1s and 5s. Some people answer 3s and 4s on the Likert scale. They both have a personality, but the response pattern of 1s and 5s gives a more spiky profile. But profile who's a bit more down the middle, it doesn't mean they have less of a personality. They're just potentially it's the response pattern they've taken. Patterns between factors such as the neuroticism, extroversion you mentioned before, statistical anomalies. So what we mean by this, all aspects are correlated. All traits in personality are correlated. It's very rare to find a zero correlation. So let's say extroversion and neuroticism have a very strong correlation and it's negative. So high extroverts don't tend to be neurotic and high neurotic don't tend to be extroverts. But what's interesting, if you know that data about how the tool is constructed, you can look for anomalies. So if you find somebody highly extroverted and neurotic, you go, isn't that interesting? That doesn't usually happen. So, and lots of strong preferences versus low preference, but that's more response pattern. So, and now we go to the most fun bit to finish on. What are your favorite questions to ask in a coaching session? What do you notice? Yeah, what stands out for you? Let's go explore. What do you think about your results? I also like it going back to Dawn's point. Now I also ask, what do you like about your results? To highlight the positive. How does it show up for you? How do you feel about it? How does this play outside of work? Can you relate to your profile? What piques your interest? Has anything changed? What surprised you?
I think one thing that was useful whenever I being on either side, so obviously receiving psychometric feedback as well as giving it, is to ask if there are any specific scenarios that they can think affirm certain things or are completely wrong. So I remember asking someone, I gave them a specific point in feedback and then asked if there was an instance where they felt that, they were something was completely wrong about the way it came out. And they were like, yeah, I totally disagree with this because the other day at work, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating. Disagreement is brilliant. It took me years to get comfortable with it. Before clients disagreed with something, I'd go, well, this, and this. And now I go, well, how would you describe yourself? So it's like, what do you particularly disagree about it? And then you can, as you mentioned, Ariel, so it's one at work, but what was different about those circumstances? And because it took me ages to realize disagreement is a form of engagement. I find much more difficult to have a client who's very laid back, like not particularly fussed, to get them engaged than somebody who actively disagrees. I find the active disagreement fascinating. Like it's like, all of this is nonsense and horoscopes and makes no sense. And this is wrong. Well, if it's so wrong and so nonsense, why are they having such a strong emotional reaction to it? So yeah. Anything else stands out? So from my side, there's some of the questions. How would you describe your personality? What would you like to cover? Or, what would you like to develop? Have you completed assessments before? The constant conscious managing of personality. But to me, the most fun is how do you deal with your opposites? Doesn't matter if they're high extroversion, high openness, etc. That's when it becomes fun. And with low qualities is who do you turn for this? Because if you have a symbiotic relationship, you can have a super spiky profile. Like, how is this person even functions? What you don't have is a person that worked for 10 years who's a polar opposite spiky profile. And they actually match perfectly. So, and therefore it's important to kind of put this into context. And it's not necessarily work. It can be a spouse, it can be a close friend, a confidant, but it's this, I do believe personalities develop symbiotic relationships over time. And so if it's just a low score, it doesn't mean this person doesn't do it, doesn't value it. They can have it outsourced to somebody. But if they don't have it outsourced, sometimes this is where the biggest benefit is. Such as if I have a super extroverted leader with no introversion, maybe having a bit more reflection and wash-up sessions, counting to 15 after they ask any questions, can have some of the biggest impact. Same if I have a super introverted client, not old extroversion, realizing that other people are not psychic, and to know what you want can be really key. Or if somebody who's highly agreeable, they might not be focused on their needs, but needs of others. I really like this Esther Perel quote, behind every complaint lies a wish. So you kind of start with the littlest thing in this lowest score, or the most opposite kind of strength, what have you. And I think sometimes this is where the highest return on investment lies, if this person doesn't have somebody to outsource it to. Does that make sense? And talking about next steps, oh, well, first of all, is there any questions you're afraid the client will ask you about psychometric testing? Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, we're running about 5 minutes late, but don't worry, it's going to be only 5 minutes. I mean, the fact is we managed to go without a break for 2 hours. Apologies for that. And most of you still stuck around. I mean, if that's not conscientiousness, I don't know what is. So not so much uptake. Okay, so at the end of the session, I always ask for key takeaways from the session. Or if people say, well, this was interesting, I always ask what was interesting about it, or what was useful, what they will try to do between now and the next session. And this both for individuals and groups. So for example, now I stopped delivering one-off workshops. I deliver a workshop, let's say 3 hours, and then a 1 hour follow-up in 6 weeks' time. So between the first and the second, we can agree what they're going to try doing differently as a team or individuals between now and the next session. Yeah, also talking with us colleagues, motivations, who they can ask for help and assistance, anything else. Is there anything in particular you ask from your clients to help them to make next steps? Well, feel free to unmute yourself. In no particular order. Dimola, sorry, I'm so self-conscious when I pronounce your name right now.
You did well. I think for me, it would generally be what is it that they want out of it? Mm-hmm. What are the next steps? What are the aspirations for it? And how can I be of service in supporting them to get that? How can I support them in that journey? Beautiful. But there was something you said earlier on, which I've always been curious of, and I've tried a couple of times. It's when to recognize this is no longer a coaching relationship and they need something a bit more, and actually just how we contract around that. If it's, especially where there are a lot of high emotional things being poured out and people are going through tough times within work, etc. It's how we draw that line and actually just being very clear what my role is as a coach in this construct, not a therapist.
It's like, it took me ages to realize, because when clients were telling me this was therapeutic, and go, it's not therapy. And now I kind of realized that I asked them, what was therapeutic about it? And it's like, well, to tell my story and all of this, have you done this before? You know, AKA, did you go to therapy? Yeah. And some clients say, yeah, but some people, I never considered it. and then you can kind of refer them, etc. But I think that therapy and coaching are beautifully complementary.
I agree.
Therapy can address this more deeper held stuff, and coaching can help you to put it more into practice.
Yeah.
But yeah, having a few good therapists in your network is key. And I believe everybody should have a clinical psychology drinking partner. It puts everything into perspective. Thank you, Dimal, for sharing. That's lovely. And writing down keywords, what they will do as a result. Yeah, how to discuss areas you didn't have a chance to cover. I'm very, very conscious about this statement right now because we're over time. So good people. What any key takeaways from today that people would like to share?
Ooh.
Thank you, Barbara. Hopefully see you next session. And by the way, there's one session tomorrow at 11, which is going to be just about Luminous Spark if you're interested. But otherwise, we will have the next session, and just I'll post this probably tomorrow, maybe Monday, about team dynamics as Aaron described. So we're going to be looking at use of psychometrics for team dynamics and team coaching and team development. Seeing the person first. My take is general learning to keep in mind are squishy. Yes, they are squishy, but that's what makes them so fun. It's like a scientific approach to try to grasp the ungraspable. And we've been doing this for thousands of years as well. This is nothing new. And if you're interested in history, please check out our YouTube channel. There's 2 hours on it. Watch outs and the benefits. And just last but not least, because we're doing this for charity, so if all we ask, there's no payment for the sessions, but that if you can make a discretionary donation to a charity of your choice, we'd very much appreciate that. Is there any charities you would recommend? So any charities that are close to your heart, so other people can kind of go, oh, that's interesting. Because I mean, the world right now is so messed up. But in the worlds of Rogers, the American TV personality, says, when I watch the news as a child and I used to get scared, my mom always said, look for the people who are helping. There are always people who are helping. And if we can support those people, that'd be great. So what is this charity? What? Can somebody unmute themselves and share?
Yeah. Yes, sir. I'll share. So, you guys have my voice?
Yes, loud and clear.
So I'll love to explain. Agreeableness is Lahore-based, Pakistan-based charity, and they're the biggest in the world, providing interest-free loans. And I love what I love the most. I've been into Unilever. I'm ex-Unilever, and the best thing about them I love is they're supporting transgender. So they help inducted transgender into Unilever and other multinational organization, and their return rate is 99.9%. So they don't need any guarantee. They don't need anything. I mean, some letter or some, guarantor. So they give the loan, and 99.9%, if I'm not wrong, people return them. So that's why I wrote it here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
So they can just Google it. Thank you so much. And there's so many wonderful charities. Anybody else wants to say about the charity before we close?
I just wrote food banks just because of the cost of living crisis and how tough things are getting at the moment. Quite easy to do. Just drop up some donations to your local food bank to help out people.
And many shops like Sainsbury's and Waitrose have a donation basket anyway, so you don't need to even go far.
Yeah.
And let's not forget baby banks as well.
Yes. Yes.
So there's definitely opportunities to do good. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining, for sharing the wonderful charities, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge as well. And it's always a pleasure to host these sessions because it's so wonderful because of everybody who comes here and shares their knowledge and connect. So hopefully you also had the chance to connect. It was a fun 2 hours without even a break. I mean, that's hats off to you, showing grit and resilience. And yeah, and otherwise, hopefully see you at the next session. Please check out the YouTube channel. If you have any questions about personality assessments, always feel free to just LinkedIn with me and message me. And otherwise, I wish you a wonderful afternoon, morning, or evening, depends where you are, and hopefully see you at the next session. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
everybody.
you.